Are you ready to supercharge your wealth and unlock the power of passive income? Welcome to this episode of Dividend Discussion, where we embark on an enriching journey through the realm of dividend investing. Whether you're a seasoned pro or just starting out, this series is a gateway towards invaluable insights and firsthand experiences that will propel you towards financial independence. Join me as we dive deep into the minds of others in the dividend investing space that are eager to share their stories, mistakes, triumphs, and life-changing lessons. In each episode, we unlock the secrets of successful dividend investing, ensuring you can sidestep costly pitfalls and chart your own path towards financial freedom. Sit back, relax, and immerse yourself in this captivating episode of Dividend Discussion. Hello and welcome to another episode of Dividend Discussion here on Dividend Obsession. My name is Troy, and today I have the pleasure of speaking with Ryne Williams. Ryne, go ahead and tell the people a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, man. Well, first and foremost, thank you so much for having this conversation with me. I'm stoked to get into it. A little bit about me. I live in Las Vegas. I am a diehard dividend investor. I've been doing this for the last not too long, maybe about 4 years at this point. But in doing so, I have my own YouTube channel where I talk about dividend investing, share my portfolio. I have an email newsletter where I write a bit more about that stuff. But yeah, that's me in a nutshell. Just I got a love for dividends. I like talking about it.
Yeah. Would you say you're dividend obsessed?
Oh my gosh. Yeah. It's probably the best way to put it.
There
I'm
you
like
go.
yourself.
Yeah, that's why the channel's named what it is. I was thinking of all the things. I was like, man, I'm kind of obsessed with this. I was like, there it is. But so question off topic, on topic. You said you're in Vegas. How are you close enough to the strip to like see the whole disaster of like the Grand Prix and stuff and the Formula One or whatever?
I mean, I live about 20 minutes from the strip. So I'm not too far, and it's very easy to get to from where I live. But yeah, this week, man, I'm not going down to the strip. I mean, they've been doing construction down there for months now.
Yeah.
And certain parts of it, certain pockets around the strip, it's pretty hectic to navigate through. But yeah, you drive down the strip, you see all the grandstands, you see the bleachers on the side of the road that block like the Bellagio fountains and some of the other attractions. And I don't know. I know a lot of people here aren't too thrilled about what's going on with the F1, and I think the first night was kind of a doozy. I think one of the cars got wrecked from
a pothole or like a manhole cover or something.
Yeah. That wasn't intact or something like that. But otherwise, I think it's going okay. We'll see what happens. But yeah, I'm not going down there. I'm sure it's a madhouse.
I wonder if you'll be able to hear it from your house.
I haven't so far. Not so far. I think I'm a little bit too far from that. But yeah, I don't know. I can't tell you how many videos I've seen just like from the local Las Vegas Instagram channels posting about the cars and stuff like that. I don't know, a lot going on this weekend.
Yeah, I mean,
but it's cool. Like that's the thing about Vegas. Like there's always something going on here.
Yeah,
so.
yeah. I mean, you guys have gotten like 4 different professional sports teams in the last like 3 years. So you're doing something there.
Yeah. So I just, and I'm not a huge sports guy, by the way, but I did read a couple days ago that officially like the A's are coming to Vegas. Mm-hmm. And that's another thing kind of like F1 that I think has some pretty mixed reception amongst the locals. So
what would be I understand the like the mixed reception amongst the locals for like the F1, especially like you're doing construction to the strip, which is the main attraction. But like with the sports team, whether it's the Raiders or the A's or the Aces or whatever it might be, like what's the dilemma with that?
I'm not entirely sure, but I think part of it probably has to do with funding those sort of projects and certain taxpayers not wanting their tax dollars to go towards something like that. They probably think there's better use for it. It could create more traffic, more chaos, depending on where the stadiums go. I know when Allegiant was first built, which is where the Raiders play, some guy in an Uber the other day was telling me about this. Because I've only been living here a year, but he was telling me that when Allegiant first was built and they were first started playing games there, it was the first like 5 or 6 games. It was like people couldn't even get into the game because there was so much trouble navigating traffic and the logistics behind all that was pretty chaotic. I mean, they've since figured it out, obviously, but I think there's just a myriad of reasons why people might not be super thrilled. But I do think the tax dollar thing and the funding is a pretty big component of that.
Yeah, I'm in Oklahoma City, and right now they're actually on December 12th. They're going to be having a vote to see if they're going to build the new Thunder Arena, which every 30 years Oklahoma City has historically built a new arena, and right now people are doing the same kind of thing. They don't know about the taxes, and I'm like, do you guys know that they bring in $500 million for the city in revenue every year? And I'm like, you're complaining about spending $900 million I'm like, literally in 2 years we made, and it goes back to like people not understanding investing and stuff like that. It's literally an investment that in 2 years you'll return your money and you'll have it for 28 years worth of gains after that. Like, why would you, like, to me, it's a no brainer. But anywho, okay. So getting into the first question. So, I mean, it's kind of the standard question, like what got you into investing and when did you start investing? And then what got you into the dividend side of investing specifically? Because there's many different rabbit holes you could have went down.
Yeah, really good question. So my first exposure to investing was and I'm 30 years old right now, but my first exposure to investing was probably when I was like 11 or 12 or 13, somewhere in that range. My dad's pretty into investing, both real estate and stocks. And so when I was around that age, my parents had made custodian accounts or custodial accounts at one of the two, same thing. Um, Custodian accounts for myself and my siblings, which is basically investment accounts that are managed by your parents. And from that point forward, every Christmas, every birthday, Arbor Day, whenever there was a gift that needed to be given, my parents would just give us money for Charles Schwab. And, obviously being that young, not really knowing anything about that stuff, it's like probably one of the least exciting gifts you can receive. You know what I mean? But nonetheless, it was one of those things where they just say, someday you're going to thank us for this. Someday you're gonna realize how important this investing thing is, and you're going to be glad that we started it for you when we did. And it's kind of a running joke in the family at that point because it was like, okay, Dad, yeah, sure,
Yeah.
Charles. Well, I don't know who this Charlie
Who's
guy is,
Charles and
but
why does he get all my money?
yeah, exactly. But okay, we'll see. And in hindsight, he was right. It probably didn't hit me until I was about 25 or 26 after years of birthdays and Christmases and money going into that account. Something clicked. And I guess for lack of a better term, I kind of woke up to just how important and also exciting investing can be. And I'm not entirely sure what it was. I think a big piece of it was at the time just really being unhappy with the job that I had and the prospect of and the idea of potentially having to stay in this job, which obviously you can switch jobs at your own free will, but still thinking, gosh, if I'm going to be miserable, it's going to be not great to stay in this job for the next 20, 25, 30
Mhm.
years if I had to do it. I don't know if I could. And so and maybe at that time I'd heard that classic Warren Buffett quote that says if you don't find a way to make money in your sleep, you're going to work until you die. And so me not being happy with what I was doing for work, thought I don't want to die doing this. I hate this. And so I think that's something that really like made a light bulb go off in my head and made me realize I need to start doing this investing thing. And so with that, to learn about it, because I had I the birthday money, the Christmas money going into the account, that was growing, but I didn't have anything to do with that. I had no idea what I was doing. So I was essentially starting investing from scratch. And instead of just putting money into Charles Schwab, I started an account on Robinhood and started investing for myself from zero in that account. So at that point, I had two different accounts. You know what I mean? And to learn about this stuff, because once again, I had no clue what I was doing, I turned to the one place where I'd learned a handful of other things throughout my life. I turned to YouTube to just figure out where to start and kind of how to learn the ropes of this investing stuff. And upon doing so, I was exposed to quite a handful of different channels. The Graham Steffens, the Andres, Jeremy Financial Education, the Meet Kevins, the big guys, I was
Mhm.
watching them. But I was also probably through that and suggested videos, I discovered other channels like PPC Ian, Dividend Data, Dividend Bull, my man Russ Knopf, JJ Buckner, The Dream Green Show, Darth Dividend. The list goes on and on. I was also getting exposure to these dividend investing channels. And the more that I watched those, I really leaned into that. Something about that really resonated with me. So when I first started investing for myself, I kind of had a mixture of things going on. I was buying like Virgin Galactic or CRISPR Therapeutics, Beyond Meat, these things that quite frankly were way over my head. I had no idea what I was doing. It's just you hear people talking about them. And so it's like, yeah, okay, give it a shot, see what happens. So I was doing that, but simultaneously, I was also inspired by these dividend investing guys, which prompted me to buy things for better for worse. And I'm sure we'll get into this. Things like AT&T and Verizon and Coca-Cola, Procter and Gamble, Starbucks, 3M, these big blue chip dividend investing companies. And the more that I kind of listened to the dividend investing guys, the more that I kind of learned about that style of investing, the more that it resonated with me. I really liked the idea of not having to sell shares down the road, not necessarily having to rely on the share price to go up. Because when a lot of people think of the stock market, if you don't know any better, you think of this thing that just goes up and down without rhyme or reason. And so I like not having to really rely on that. I felt that there was this whole other dimension to it that a lot of people didn't even know existed. And so the cash flow aspect is something that really excited me. And it's very, as a new investor, it's a very tangible thing to understand that, if I want to stop working and want my investments to fund my lifestyle, I just have to reach a certain income level that matches my active income level. So that was not lost on me. It was very easy to understand. And so anyway, it's reasons like that that really made me gravitate towards dividend investing. But simultaneously, when thinking about this job that I hated and just wanted a way out of, for me, it's like as I contributed to my portfolio and put money into this and saw my annual dividend income, trickle up step by step, penny by penny, one penny at a time, as my friend Harris would say. For me, that was kind of like each little bit of progress in that department was one step closer to being out of this thing that I just could not stand. On the other side of that was for me like a happier, more fulfilling, more free life. And that's what I wanted more than anything. And I think that's why a lot of us get into investing, is to be able to ultimately have total control over our time and our freedom and stuff like that, and not have to be tied down to this job that you may or may not hate. At least that was the motivation for me. And so all the progress that was being made in that department, it was like a weight was starting to be lifted off of my shoulders, and I started to see this light at the end of the tunnel. As more progress would be made, the brighter that light would get. And so that was how I got into investing, and also how I gravitated towards dividend investing. And I'm sorry to be so
No,
long-winded with
no,
that,
no.
but hopefully that
Yeah, the
that
context
makes
is
sense.
helpful. So, a couple follow-up questions on that. So, you mentioned that your parents started you that custodial account. Did you, knowing what you know now, do you was it more the symbolism of getting you started with investing, or like did you get to see some of the stuff in there and how it's grown? And do you still have the holdings that you had when they picked them, or did you change some of that money around now that it's your own account, or how'd that work?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I got to see what moves were being made. I didn't pick any of them. It was just kind of me looking over my dad's shoulder as he, invested in things like Sirius XM Radio or Berkshire Hathaway, or SCHD was one of the holdings. And admittedly, when there was a period where I combined both my Robinhood account and my Charles Schwab account into one. And I just got to a point where I was like, I don't see why I'd have two portfolios. I'll just combine them into one. And upon doing so, I kind of started from scratch. At least I combined it all into Charles Schwab, and so I ended up getting rid of pretty much all of those holdings that I had, the Berkshire. And I don't know, maybe someday I'll come to regret that. I think I've done all right. I think I've done all right so far. But yeah, I ended up selling out of all those positions, even SCHD, which is now like a huge portion of my Roth IRA. So I sold it just to start buying back into it, a year or so later.
Yeah.
But yeah, I ended up selling out of them, and I don't know. I guess that's the
What did
final
your
answer.
dad say on that?
Nothing. Nothing really. I think and I talked to my dad a lot about investing too, and um he didn't really have anything to say about that sort of thing. I think he knows, he reads all my newsletters and sees what I'm buying and the income, and he sees how the portfolio is growing. And I think he's more than anything, I think he's just happy that um that I became so interested in it. And it's funny too, like I said, when we were kids, he would say, "You're going to thank me someday." Sure enough, he was right. It's just crazy to think about too, like doing what I do now and how deep I've gotten into this stuff. Um, if you would have told me 5 years ago or 6 years ago that I'd be not only investing and in actually enjoy it, but talking about it to the extent that I do, um, I thought I wouldn't have believed you. I would have thought you were crazy. Life takes you in some really interesting directions sometimes.
Yeah. I mean, it's cool that you did a complete 180 because you went from something that you hated doing to something that you're passionate about. One for others and two for yourself, which is, obviously important because, what's the quote that if you, like what you do, you'll never work a day in your life or something like that. So, I mean, you went through that hard time of doing something that you couldn't see yourself doing for long periods of time and stuff like that to now you're doing something that you do get to do and you enjoy doing. So that's the American dream, I guess, right there. So
Yeah, absolutely. And I wish that for everyone, and I think, I really think investing can be a way out. If you can't change jobs, if you can't, there's so many things in our lives that we cannot control that are out of our hands. But this is one thing that you can. And I think even just incremental progress in this direction, improving your financial future, um, I think for a lot of people who are getting into this or looking for some way out of a bad situation or want something to motivate them or want to have something to look forward to, I think this could be that. It's something that's within your control. And as you start to take steps down this direction, I think, um, yeah, I think you'll feel that same thing I did, where it's like a weight starts to come off your shoulders a little bit. Things start to feel a bit easier, and you start to connect the dots and see, if I just keep doing this thing, 20 years from now, things are going to be looking pretty good.
yeah. Well, and the at the end of the day, like when you say, pretend somebody else is in your old situation where you have this job that you might not like, and you can start now by trying to take control of your financial future. The options seem to be you still spend the same 20 years, but at the end of the 20 years where you took control of your financial future, you can stop doing whatever you don't like and you're in charge, versus the same 20 years has elapsed still doing something that you don't like, and there's no other option. Like now you just have to spend the next however many years until you can retire or whatever doing something that you don't like. So it's kind of
Yeah.
like you're in for the 20 years regardless. You might as well do the path that's going to get you to take control of your own future anyway. So
And saying that makes sense to you and me, but there's so many people out there who will hear that, understand it, but still won't do anything about it. And that's
mhm.
fine. Everyone's got to do what they think is best. But I think a lot of times it's like, I don't want to, I can think of 100,000 things I'd rather spend money on than giving it to Charles Schwab.
Yeah.
So I do think it's easier said than done, and I understand that. But nonetheless, it's like anything that's worth having is not easy to obtain. And so it may not be easy. It may not be something. It's like eating broccoli. It may not be something that you want to do, but it's good for you, and you should do it anyway.
Yeah. I mean, eventually you'll like it or you'll just hate it less. So, I mean, those are your
Well,
two
you'll
options.
once you start bringing in those dividend paychecks, you'll really start to like it.
Yeah,
So
yeah. There you go. So, okay. So actually, you spoke about this already. But my question, and I like the second part of this question more than the first one. The first one makes me sad. But so the first part of the question is, what is your biggest dividend related mistake? And more importantly than the mistake, this is the part of the question I like, is what lesson did you learn from making that mistake?
that's a really good question, and it's a, it's also for me, it's like a really tough one to answer because I truthfully don't feel that I've done anything that I in my portfolio that I regret. I don't know that I have any mistakes. There's probably things I could have done better, and there's certainly been learning experiences, but I don't know that I look at some of those things as mistakes. And I'll give you a concrete example. Um, I actually just the other day I put out a video where I talked about 4 stocks that I want to sell out of in my portfolio, and 2 of those stocks are ones like AT&T and Verizon. Those were 2 of the first stocks that I bought when I had just started investing. And my thought process when I had bought into them initially was, I mean, number one, I just think, obviously we're so reliant on this thing. I think that at this point, paying your phone bill is going to be as expected as paying your electricity bill. You're not
Mm-hmm.
going to go without, you know, lights or electricity or what have you. Similarly, I think people will cut out so many other things before they decide to shut off their communication. And so I figured this is something that everyone's more or less hooked on and needs in their life at this point, or is so reliant on at the very least, that I think it's a pretty safe investment. And looking at the dividend stats of both of those companies at the time, pretty solid. At the time, this was before AT&T had spun off Warner Media. So they were a dividend aristocrat. They had a high yield. If Verizon still has in your 20-year dividend growth streak, very high yield for that company. So I looked at those at a time and invested in them at a time when I didn't really know what I was doing, and interest, like I still have so much to learn, but I've since come a long way. Um, but I looked at those couple of dividend stats, and with that thought process in mind, decided these are probably going to be good, safe ones to hold, for a long term. So let's buy into them. But now, a few years into it, as I've had the chance to had the opportunity to learn more about investing, learn more about analyzing businesses, learned the nuances of some different industries, and have been able to reflect on the holdings in my portfolio with kind of a new outlook, I suppose. I look at positions like that, and I look at those type of businesses, and it's just not as attractive of a business to me as it was when I first started investing. Sure, the yield is nice. I still think the cash flow is going to be steady. I think the dividends will continue to come in, but I don't think either of those businesses will, for me, will create any sort of meaningful return. And I say that now because I think I just have a better understanding of the business itself. I now am aware just of how capital intensive these businesses are. And I compare that to some of the other positions in my portfolio and some of these other companies that I've been looking at that are not as capital intensive and don't have to constantly maintain their infrastructure in the same way that and upgrade their infrastructure in the same way that these telecom companies do, going from 4G to 5G to
Mhm.
whatever comes after. Um, and furthermore, I look at other businesses that are not as leveraged, do not have as much debt on the balance sheet, and I look at these other ones and I feel a bit better about that. And so once again, I don't know that I consider anyway. Long story short, I'm considering and will eventually sell out of both of those two positions. But I don't know that I consider investing in them in the first place to be a mistake, because there was a pretty valuable lesson to be learned from that. And I think I would have had a harder time learning that if I didn't experience it the hard way.
Mhm.
And so, once again, I don't know that I consider the investment into those a mistake. I'll probably ultimately lose money in the long run when I do sell, but it's not going to be anything wrecking. I might lose a few $100 when it's all said and done. That's, you know, it's a slap on the wrist in the grand scheme of things. It's okay. And once again, I don't know that I would have learned that lesson or would have been able to deploy that hindsight if I didn't have those in the portfolio to reflect on. Does that all make sense?
Yeah, yeah, and I've said this in I believe in other interviews before where I'm just like the idea and it's hard to word that question too cuz like I definitely understand where you're coming from where it's like not necessarily a mistake. It's almost like what's the biggest cost of a lesson that you've had? And that's what I
Yeah.
said in the other interviews is like in the beginning, not even in the beginning, during your investing journey, you're going to make mistakes throughout the whole thing. And at the end of the day, the thing that you need to do is one, make sure you're learning from whatever that mistake was. Like in your case, it's not necessarily a mistake that you bought AT&T and Verizon and you might only lose, a couple $100. The difference is the opportunity cost. If that same amount of time that you put into AT&T and T and the capital and time you put into AT&T and Verizon, if you would have put that into something like Visa or even SCHD or VOO or whatever, or QQQ for crying out loud, like any of those kind of things, like that's where it's like, okay, I only lost, $300-400, but I could have gained $1,500 or whatever. So like that's the difference. But more importantly is like whether you want to call it a mistake or not, like for you or anybody else that's in your situation, more importantly is like you understand why you did it. You understand why it's no longer a thing you're going to do, and there was a cost associated with that. And as long as it's well worth the $500 or whatever you're going to lose, as long as you were able to identify why you did it and why you're not going to do it. It's worth it. Now the thing is, a lot of people don't learn those lessons and they end up making the mistake when their portfolio is 10 times bigger and it costs them 10 times more. So like that's the trade-off there where it could cost you $500 now, but in 10 years it could cost you $5,000 or $50,000 or whatever. So it's important to take away what you need to take away and make sure you can, improve to be a better investor going into the future.
Yeah. Very well said, man. And I'll add to that too, just kind of closing the book on AT&T and T and Verizon. Having said all of that, that's not to say that they're necessarily bad investments and you shouldn't invest in them, because I think they do have a place in some investors' portfolios. But for me at this stage in the game, with the way that I think right now, it's not a fitting investment for me. But having said that, I also know people in the community that bought those stocks very low and now have, double digit total returns with those two. And so that was a good move. I think timing, they say not to time the market, but another, I guess, lesson supposedly that I learned is to maybe be a bit more patient
Mm-hmm.
some of these and not rush into things, because with some of these you might end up catching some falling knives, or you might buy into it and they immediately go down, and maybe that would have been avoided if you would have just been a little bit more patient and taken some time to understand what you're looking at a bit better.
Yeah.
So
And the crappy thing about that is it also works the other way. So I have two
sure.
cases for that. Is so actually it's the same case, but it's two parts. So I did that with Nvidia, where I sold Nvidia. It was like 3 days before earnings, and then it went up 24% because that's what happens when you sell stocks. But I sold it and it skyrocketed. But like I bought Nvidia because of the Facebook group I joined. Everybody was talking about it, whatever. I didn't convince myself why I wanted to buy it. I bought it because somebody else told me to, pretty much. Which I never recommend for your channel or my channel. Like, that's why we always say do your own research, because you have to have conviction in the stocks you're going to have. But anyway, I bought Nvidia. I was up 55% on it when I sold it. So like nobody's ever went broke making money. So like I was okay with my profit. I put that into Costco. So I could have, wanted to get back into Nvidia or whatever when it did its whole hype. But then I bought Costco, and I could have put the money in smaller increments into Costco. But then Costco like almost has, I think it's had like 5 red days since I've owned it. It feels like it only goes up. And if I would have done that, I would have missed the I could have, so exactly what you were just saying. I could have spaced the money out, because there is a chance that Costco falls, 10% for whatever reason. And then I, wasn't trying to catch a falling knife, and I could have averaged down. But I put it all in the beginning, and it ended up working out for me because it has seemingly gone up every day since. So it's kind of one of those, like, you're darned if you do, darned if you don't kind of things. Because if I would have dollar cost average in that situation, it wouldn't have worked out. But then in other situations where you are more patient and you take time for your holdings, it could have dropped and you could have got a better deal, 5-10% discount off of what you were going to buy it for anyway. So it is a delicate balance. And that's why you say on your channel, and I say all the time in here, is like finding a strategy that works with you, one that you can follow and live with, and then also removing as much emotion as possible. That's why I dollar cost average every day, because I was like, okay, if I buy on Tuesdays, like what if there's like something that happens on Mondays that causes it to go up or down or whatever. I was like, just do it every day. I don't care what the stock does. I'm in it for the long haul. That's why I made that video called Stock Price Doesn't Matter, because at the end of the day, I have such a long time horizon. I'm not going to care if I buy Apple at 165 or 167. It's not going to make a difference. Like if you are closer to the end of your goal or your timeline, and you're going to be, needing the money, or you need the investment to be a positive return in the next year or whatever, like that's a completely different outlook versus me. I have 21 years left. So 21 years before I hope to use the money. I have way more longer to invest. So it's one of those things. That's why, and that video wasn't clickbait. That was generally what I believe. Cause like with dollar cost averaging and fractional shares, you can get any company you want at any time with any amount of money. You have to have $1. You can get any stock. So imagine.
So with that said is, go ahead.
I was going to say, imagine trying to save enough money to get a share of Berkshire Hathaway. Good luck.
Yeah. Yeah, true that, man. So with that said, is 50 years old, that's your number? That's what you're shooting for?
50 is my number out of a hat I pulled for to be able to retire off of the dividend portfolio. And I've said this before, like my goal isn't to retire and be a bump on a log. It's to be able to kind of like what you said, like stop working something that I may or may not want to do, and for sure do something that I do want to do, whether it does or does not pay. Whether, because going back to what you said about your parents starting you at the Charles Schwab account, as soon as my son was born and we got a Social Security card, I put him on my Capital One credit card. So when he's 18, he's going to have 18 years worth of credit card history, which is, he's going to be pretty close to a perfect credit score, if not already a perfect one. And that's up to him at hopefully the morals and values we teach him, he'll do good things with that. But it's his to mess up. At that point, like he's off my credit, like do whatever you want. And then same thing, we have him a custodial account, right? It's the UGMTA or whatever, the transfer to minors account. And that's with Fidelity. So like anytime he gets money. So what the wife and I are going to do is every year at tax return time, we're going to figure out like what we got bonus for like claiming him as our dependent. And we're going to put that money in there, any Christmas money, birthday money, tooth fairy money, whatever. And what we might do is like when he's really young and we're paying for everything for him, 100% of whatever is going to go in there. And as he gets older, we're going to change the percentages. So maybe when he gets like, 10 years old, we'll change it to like 80% of whatever he gets goes in there, and he gets 20% that he gets to spend. And we'll probably have a limit that we don't go below, like 50% of everything. Because my mom used to do that for me, but it was a savings account. So anytime I get $100, 50 goes in my wallet, 50 goes in my savings account. So it's
Mhm.
kind of one of those things where we might do like a 50% thing. Like when you're, 16 and you want to have money to go to the mall or whatever kids are doing when he's 16. If he wants to do that, like if he gets $500 from whatever, 250 of that's going in his investment account. He gets 250 to do whatever he wants with.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
Yeah. So, and like I said, we haven't talked about like the percentages and stuff, but like figuring that out as far as like understanding, like first thing is pay yourself first. Like this money goes in here. This is what we're going to do. And in the beginning, like I have him in, I think QQQJ and VOO are the holdings that he has in his account. Hopefully, like you said, with your dad, like you're looking over his shoulder, he was buying stuff. As I do it, like I'm going to try to incorporate him in it and be like, hey, this is what I'm buying. This is why I'm buying it, whatever. But as he starts going to school and hearing things about certain companies, I'm like, okay, let's look into that. Let's see if this is a good idea. And if you want to, because he'll be able to buy it and it's going to be little amounts of money. Like we're going to limit it to small amounts for anything that he identifies. But like, hey, this is what you identified. This is, something that you wanted to buy. Let's see if it works out. We'll put, $100 into it, see what happens. And if it doesn't work, we'll be like, okay, now, same thing, the mistake and the lesson. Like, okay, the mistake is FOMO. You let your friends talk you into something, whatever. What's the lesson? It cost you $100. Let's figure out, what we did and what we're not going to do going forward. And hopefully by the time he's 18, he has a perfect credit score, a lot of money to invest, and he's got lots of lessons that he's learned that he can use for however long to make himself a good investor. So,
Well, dude, when the time comes to start reading those bedtime stories, I hear the intelligent investors are
yeah.
pretty effective at putting kids to sleep. So
Yeah, I think most investing books are really good bedtime stories.
yeah.
Yeah, we'll do Rich Dad, Poor Dad, and all kinds of stuff. Like, yeah,
There you go, man.
by one paragraph, he's knocked out every time. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
I don't know if
Yeah.
that'd be a good review to give the author or not. But like, hey, I was reading your book to my son, and he falls asleep instantly.
Well, probably not, but I
I
don't
mean, at
know.
the end of the day, I bought the book, so I guess they already got what they're getting out of it.
Yeah, so I guess he shouldn't be too concerned about
Yeah,
it.
there you go. All right, there we go. So, okay, so you mentioned your obviously your upbringing into investing, and then you mentioned that you've been doing it on your own for, you said, about 4 years now.
Yeah, I think it's been about 4 years at this point.
Okay, so how, if at all, has your investing style changed from when you first started until now?
Well, when I first started, I was kind of half in, half out to a few different strategies. Like I said, when I really first got started, I had some dividend stocks. I had some more speculative things that I thought would be good growth stocks. At a certain point, I just decided to lean fully into dividend investing. So that's one way that it changed. But furthermore, from the start until now, I've just really, as best as I can and however that I can, have tried to learn more about the craft and learn more about how to actually look at businesses and how to be an investor. And that's one of those things. I mean, it's a lot. It's an infinite game. It's something that you're always going to be a student of the game. So it's a constant work in progress. Um, but I would say along the way, my just the way that I think about these things, my understanding of what to look for and what to avoid has changed. Um, and I just think in general, man, I've really made an effort to, like I said, try and learn more about this stuff, try and teach myself how to read financial statements, try to learn how to value businesses, try and just think about businesses and industries in a way that actually makes sense, and I've really made an effort to try and study the greats. I've just really tried to soak up as much Peter Lynch and Warren and Charlie and Monish Pabrai and all those guys. I've really tried to just in general be a student of the game and get better in any way that I can. And it's been a long journey so far. I mean, 4 years in the grand scheme of things as an investor is not a long period of time, but throughout that time, yeah, it's been a huge learning experience in more ways than one. So in general, man, just trying to get better, just trying to learn, just trying to soak up as much information as I can, and hope that along the way I can apply that to my own portfolio, and hopefully that will result in some winning investment choices. I'd say for the most part, it's been that way. I've had a couple that have not worked out, as we've talked about, but that just comes with the territory. It's unavoidable. So that's kind of where I'm at, and it'll continue to progress too. It's like I said, it's a never-ending journey. So the way that I think now and what I've evolved to now is probably going to look different 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road. So it'll be interesting to see. And it'll be interesting to look back on this conversation and all the other content that's out there that I've made and see kind of what that looks like and how the portfolio adapts with that.
Yeah, I brought that up in a recent interview. Like that's the coolest thing about like creating content. And for people that are watching that might not be content creators, even like tracking your progress, that's the coolest thing. Cause like when you write down why you bought a position, like you write down like everything you know about that position, you write down what your reason was to put your hard-earned money and push the buy button. But as you grow as an investor and a dividend investor and you as well, as you continue to grow, like it's cool to look back because eventually, whether it's 1 year, 5 years, 10 years later, you should look back and not necessarily call yourself dumb, but like be very surprised on like some of the decisions you made. And more importantly than the decision you made, but like why you made the decision. And the reason isn't like to put you down, but the reason should be like, if you are at a place now where you can say those things about your past self, you're clearly smarter and more knowledgeable about whatever you're talking about. Because like you make all the decisions you make today based off the knowledge you have today. So if you have new knowledge and more knowledge later down the road, you can make different, more wise and better decisions in the future. And then you can go back and judge like, okay, I know I'm not going to make this decision now because I know, PE ratio doesn't matter as much as I thought it did. It's more about the free cash flow or whatever it might be. Like I remember I told the story a bunch of times on the channel when I first started dividend investing. I didn't know what dividend yield was. So I basically backwards calculated dividend yield where I was like, okay, if I put $100 into this stock, how many pennies is that going to give me? And like I was doing that, and then I sorted the spreadsheet by that, and I was like, okay, if I buy AT&T, I'm gonna get 7 pennies for every $100 I put in there. And then I was like, oh, this one, I was like, so I was trying to be efficient with my money. That's what I called it. But I didn't know what I'm like, I literally like now that I know what I know, I can look back. I'm like, dude, you just freaking calculated this number. I was like, what are you doing? But so yeah, it's just all kinds of cool stuff like that. Like I said, we have the experience of doing like the content creation, so it's easy for us to go back. But that's why I say it's so important to track your progress as an investor and dividend investor specifically, because you get to go back and evaluate some of your past decisions and see how much you've grown.
Yeah, I mean, for better or for worse, you can go back and evaluate your past decisions because some of them I'm sure will turn out to be pretty cringe. You might look at some of the things you used to say and the way you used to think and be like, I cannot believe I put that out in public. But it's all part of the journey, man. It really is. And I think we're really fortunate to live in a time where we can put ourselves out there in that way, but also have all these other people who are doing the same that we can learn from. And hopefully by just soaking up as much information and hearing about other people's experiences, you can avoid some mistakes along the way. So it's just a really cool thing to be able to have this outlet to like I said, put ourselves out there and help others learn from our learning experiences, our mistakes, and be able to learn from others as well.
Yeah. Well, and that's what I was saying before is like whether it's a learning experience or a mistake that you made with AT&T and Verizon and the $500 that you're going to spend to learn that lesson, somebody else might either spend less money to learn the same lesson because they have to do it themselves. But best case scenario, by watching these interviews and watching your channel, is some of the stuff that we talk about, whether it's lessons learned or mistake made, they can learn the lesson off of the money that we lost, and they don't have to lose any money learning the same lesson.
Sure.
So, I
Absolutely.
mean, as much as I would not like to lose my own money and I'd rather lose somebody else's money, sometimes we're doing it for the good of the community. We're losing our money so you guys can not lose your money. So,
exactly. Everyone's going to have their own version of that too. Everyone's going to have their own AT&T. Everyone's going to have their own, their own whatever, Intel or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree. Okay. So next question. This one's always fun for me to ask. So, let's just say the next 6 months, what are some short-term goals you have with your dividend portfolio? And then what are some of the long-term, grand scheme of things that the long-term goals you have?
Really good question. So I just hit a point in my portfolio where I'm generating $2,400 of annual dividend income. So that averaged out to $200 per month. That was a really, really cool milestone to hit. So I've been really stoked about that. That was huge. And now that I've reached that, the next, I would say, short-term goal is getting to a point where, I'm averaging $300 per month. That's $3,600 per year. But before I get there, it's even, man, if I get $3,000 of annual dividend income, that's going to be huge. That's going to be rock solid. So I'd say those couple of things are my upcoming short-term goals. I definitely think by this time next year, I'll be at $3,000 of annual dividend income. It might take me another year and some change to get to averaging $300 per month, but we'll get there eventually. Long-term goals, I would just say more of the same, just continuing to, increase my income in a way that is sustainable with, good companies that I feel confident holding. Um, Long term, I just want to keep getting better and keep getting experience and developing a better understanding of how all this stuff works. Um, and that's just the, it's a never ending thing, man. As long as I live, I just want to keep doing exactly that. And
Mhm.
that's the cool thing about it. It's one of those things. Investing is one of those things where it just, the longer you play it, the better it gets. The longer you do it, the better it gets. It's the gift that keeps on giving. And so I don't know. I'm just excited, man. I'm along for the ride. I'm really excited to see what this next decade looks like. These next 20 years look like. Um, just continuing down this path. So that's pretty much it, man. That's all I can ask for is just to keep getting better.
Yeah, yeah, and I like that. So I've recommended this to a couple people. I know you have a spreadsheet because I see your recaps that you do.
Yeah.
One thing that I recommend that I don't see a lot of people talk about is kind of like the illustration of the snowball. Everybody always hears about this mythological thing, the dividend snowball, right? So one of the things that I tracked just because I have the information and it was just a thing I thought I wanted to track is how long it takes you to make your certain whatever. So what I did was I think I started this like two or 3 months ago. Is it took me 395 days to make my first $100 in dividends. And then
Mm.
I went, I was like, okay, from 100 to 200, how many days does that take? And then 200 to 300 and so on and so forth. And you can do it in like increments too. Like in the very beginning, like $100 isn't a lot or is a lot because you're making small amounts. But then once you're starting to get like $200 a month, you might change yours to 250. And you're like, how long did it take me to make my first $250? And now it's going to be like every month and a half, you're making 250 because you're probably March, June, September, December, you make more than that. And then you have other
Hopefully.
months. Yeah. So like
Gonna
it's,
knock on wood real
yeah,
quick.
there you go. So like it's one of those things like that's a really cool thing to track and it shows you like obviously you're a content creator so it shows other people, but it also shows you the snowball working in real time. Cuz like I said mine was 395 days for the first 100. I don't think it was the last 100, but I think it was the previous 100. It took me 24 days to make that
Wow.
$100. And like that was just like the timing of the month and stuff like that. Like that's how it
Yeah,
worked. I think right now I'm averaging under 50 days for each $100.
that's
So,
great.
and it's just one of those things. Like, I think it's like 44, 47, 44, 28, 44, something like that. So it's one of those things like next year I'll be able to do it. And like, I probably will end up changing it when I'm constantly making over $100 a month. I might change it to 200 or 250 and then go back and redo the math. I'm like, okay, well, how long does it take me to make 250? And then whatever. And then what you're talking about with the yearly income and then your monthly income, the cool thing is like, you can break that down as much as you want. And then like the
Sure.
cool thing with breaking that down is it's your really small numbers that you get to focus on and like they move quicker. The smaller numbers change a lot better or a lot more frequently. So you can literally say, okay, I want to get to $3,600 a year or $300 a month, but what is that like per hour? And then if you or per day, and then you could do per hour. And then like I see some people even do like per working hour. So if you were doing a 40
Right.
hours a week or whatever, and like really just focus on that little number. I want to get to the point where I'm making minimum wage per hour and I'm not even working. Like that, just something little stuff like that. And you're just like, man, that's really cool. So I think that's so valuable with especially dividend investing because it is a long game of finding
Yeah.
different ways to keep yourself motivated and track all that stuff. It's huge.
That's a great point, man. It's it's a series of small victories. You know, this is something that's going to take, which is something that not a lot of people are okay hearing, but it's the truth. It's going to take at least 10, 15, 20, 25 years to build something, I guess, worthwhile. And every step along the way is good. It's progress. It's awesome. But to really build something you can be that makes a big difference financially for you, it's going to take decades. It's going to take a long time. And so along the way, you've got to celebrate all those small victories, all those little milestones, your first dollar in dividends, your first $5 payment, your first $50 month, your first when you're averaging $100 finally every single month. All of those things, you might not be able to retire today, but you can use that as evidence that you've come a long way. And it's once again, it's evidence that the snowball exists and it is working. And to your point, each new benchmark takes less time to achieve than the previous one. And that's the snowball. That's pretty much the definition of the snowball. Um, and so sometimes it's hard to stay motivated on this journey too, because it does take so long. Sometimes it can feel like things are moving at a snail's pace, especially during times when the market's not doing too hot. You see your portfolio going down. A lot of people have a hard time staying motivated, and that's when they turn off those contributions, they get scared, and so they decide not to invest anymore because they just feel like they're losing money. But once again, with dividend investing, there's this whole other dimension to it. There's this whole other way, and arguably this more important way to measure that progress, and that's looking at your income, because at the end of the day, that's what matters. And that's not to say you should just go for the highest
Mhm.
yielding things possible, which I'm sure we'll talk about. But the point is, you've got to savor all the small victories along the way, because those are what's going to keep you going, and that's what's going to serve as evidence that what you're doing is working. And I think we all need that. I think when you see that happening in real time, it can be there's a sense of fulfillment, and there's a feeling of rewarding that comes along with that, knowing that you did that. You, who probably doesn't have this fancy finance degree, probably started doing this without much, if any, experience. You made that happen. You by your own will and your own your own brain power and your own effort, your own contributions reached, are now generating $100 a month without having to lift a finger. That $5 that you just randomly got paid, you did that. And I think that's a really cool thing. It's kind of like, if you start working out and you hit 135 on the bench press for the first time, you remember how good that felt?
Yeah.
Like, there's a similar sense of achievement that comes, I think, with investing and reaching those benchmarks. You've got to celebrate them when they come.
Yeah. And I brought this up before. It's one of my favorite like illustrations. It's like the value of small steps. Like I use the illustration of like a 6-foot ladder. Like a 6-foot ladder has a step every 12 inches, or I think that's how frequent they are. But every 12 inches, there's a step. Like imagine getting a 6-foot ladder, but there's no steps in it. Like you have to set small and obtainable goals in order to end up getting to the point that you want to get to. Because if you don't set any goals and you don't have any little metrics and little things to keep you going, you're never going to get to the top of the ladder anyway.
Right.
So it's like I always try to visualize that, like, oh, this $100 a month I made, that's one step on this ladder that I'm trying to climb. And like obviously 100 is not where I want to get to, but I can't get to 200 before I get to 100. So I got to start somewhere. So
Exactly, man. Well said.
yeah, so I like that. Okay, so now we're gonna get into the fun stuff. So do you have any stocks that you regret selling and stocks that you are pretty excited to brag about that you bought? Like maybe something that you bought really low and it's done very well for you.
Yeah, I don't have any that I regret selling, fortunately.
Not
Um,
even SCHD in your custodial account?
no, because actually, interesting. Yeah, no, I don't regret that either. I mean, interestingly enough, I sold out of SCHD when I sold out of it when I first got into investing, and bought back into it, a year and some change later in my Roth IRA. It was about the same price.
Oh,
So
okay.
it's like, it really wasn't. I don't feel like I missed out on much. And I put that money to work in other ways too. So it's fine. But yeah, I can't say that there's anything that I regret selling. Um, I'm pretty proud of, and this is like just total luck. It has nothing to do with like my skill set as an investor, but my most recent addition to the portfolio was Williams Sonoma, and I've been super hyped on that one, especially this week. Like just this week, it's up over 20%. I started buying it back in June, and it's quickly become one of my better performing positions. Like I said, it's got nothing to do with my skill set as an investor. Um, but I'm pretty proud of that one as of late. And who knows, maybe it'll crash on Monday, and I'll change my tune. But
Yeah.
yeah, for now it was looking like a pretty good decision. I've had quite a few of those in the portfolio. My Chevron position's up close to, I think, between 60 and 70%. Apple, which I bought about this time last year, is up close to 50%. So I've got quite a few that are doing pretty well. And furthermore, I've have a few in my portfolio that I've held for at least a few years now, and just by holding on to them, they've done pretty well.
Mhm.
And so I think that's good to see, knowing that time, the longer you hold something, it can make a difference. So yeah, I don't know. Overall, man, I feel like I'm really starting to come into my own as an investor, and things are a few years into it. I feel that things are clicking now than they were when I first got started, rightfully so. And just once again, I'm just been really happy with the whole journey, with the whole experience so far. And yeah, and thankful that I didn't get burned too much along the way.
Yeah, yeah, that's super cool. You and I are both probably in the same boat as far as like looking forward to that one stock you've held for 10 years and you're up like 1,000%. Like that's gonna be pretty
Yeah.
cool.
What about you, man? What I want to ask you those same questions. Any that you regret selling?
Um,
Any that you're especially proud of?
so I actually just talked about this in my Power 5 that came out yesterday at the time of this recording, where it has CDW in it. CDW is one I identified when I was doing like one of my weird like spreadsheet manipulation things that I was doing, and I bought
Yeah.
it a while ago. And it was one of those stocks like as I learned more, I wanted to change my portfolio, have less positions, stuff like that. And CDW was just on my Power 5 for the best 10-year returns. And granted, I wouldn't have had it for 10 years, but like it has solid dividend growth rates, a solid streak. It outperforms the S&P 500, like overall everything I look for. And I just sold it because I was in a repositioning, like kind of like a spring cleaning for my portfolio kind of thing.
Hmm.
And I mean, like I said, I don't remember if I was up or down on the position. I, redeployed the capital elsewhere, stuff like that. But it's one of those that I'm just like, man, this currently fits my criteria of everything I look for in a stock. I had this stock and I let it go. So like that one bothers me a little bit because like if I was in the mood to add a new position, that would be on a list of one that I would consider adding because it, like I said, it meets everything I look for. So, and then Nvidia, I've told the story hundreds of times. Like Nvidia is one I had. I was up 55% on it. It goes after hour or after earnings and goes up 24% and keeps rising after that. But I don't regret that one strictly because of where I did put the capital. So one, like I said, you never went broke making money. So I made 55% and the capital I had in it. I sold that and I bought Costco. And Costco's up like 18% for me. So like I'm doing well with that. So it's one of those like, I could have went up a significant amount more money with Nvidia, but I also put that money somewhere else. The yield on Nvidia was disrespectful at a certain point. Like I felt like you could get more with a savings account, but
Yeah.
Costco's yield's a little bit higher, their dividend growth rate and stuff like that. So it's more of what kind of stocks I like to invest in. So
Sure. And just remembering like your earlier point, it's not about what either of them are doing today. You're trying to look 10, 15, 20 years down the road, and based on that, you might get to that point in the future and look back at when you sold Nvidia to put into Costco and realize that was probably a good move.
yeah.
But
Well,
we'll
yeah,
see
and
what
it could be.
happens.
And so I was just talking earlier. I saw an article that was saying that Microsoft is getting into the AI chips similar to Nvidia. And I own a lot of Microsoft. Well, relative to my
Okay.
portfolio, I own a lot of Microsoft. I think like 11% of my portfolio is Microsoft. So it's not like I don't believe in the AI space and stuff like that. Like I have exposure to Microsoft, and if Microsoft's going to get into that, it's kind of one of those things where like it seems like the big boys always win kind of thing, like your Apple, your Microsofts, your Visas, stuff like that. They always end up, taking the majority of the cake. And I was like, if Nvidia has a chip just as good, or if Microsoft's able to make a chip just as good as Nvidia, but Microsoft also has all these other things under their network and their umbrella, I'm not positive Nvidia wins that battle. Because like to me, I'm like, okay, I can get my chips from Nvidia, but then I have to go over here and get my everything else from Microsoft. I'm like, most companies, especially businesses, are going to say, why don't I just get everything from one place? Which is how
Yeah.
Amazon came out. Like Amazon's going to start selling. I think they announced they're going to start selling Hyundais on the website on Amazon, so you can literally
Oh,
buy a
really?
Hyundai on Amazon.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so like it literally look in your life, like where do you go where one stop shop doesn't win? Like even convenience stores. Like there's a reason why they can charge you $4 for a little can of Pringles this big is because it's convenient. Like you can go to the store and get a can 3 times the size of that for half the cost.
Yeah.
But when you're on a long road trip or whatever, you're like, man, I'm really craving Pringles. You'll spend $3 for that little can. So the convenience of that, and like I said, Microsoft has such a moat on just like I have a Windows computer. I use Excel and PowerPoint and Word, and I use Outlook at work. I use Teams at work, like all kinds of stuff like that. I'm like the moat that they have, and like I said, if they can make a chip just as good as Nvidia's, I think they're going to take a lot of market share from that. So I don't know. Maybe that's just making me feel better about myself. I don't know, but
Yeah, we'll see what happens.
yeah, sounds valid in my
But
head.
that's you've clearly put a lot of thought into it, and that's the interesting thing about investing and investing in individual stocks versus just going the ETF route. The stocks that you choose to own in your portfolio are kind of a reflection of how you think about the world and what you think is going to happen. And some people look at people who buy individual stocks and just don't get it. Why would you pick any stocks when you could just buy ETFs? It's so much easier. You don't have to think about it. You don't have to worry about it. And it's true. It's much easier and much less hands off, or much more hands off, to just invest in ETFs. But man, it's fun. It's fun thinking about
Mm.
all this stuff and trying to, I don't want to say predict what's going to happen, but it's fun looking at all these different possibilities and being able to custom pick and cherry pick the ones that you think are going to turn out the best.
Yeah.
You're not always going to be right, but it's fun being able to do that.
Yeah. I
So
mean, at the end of the day, we're all building our own ETFs. That's
sure.
like we're building our own basket, deciding our allocation, what we want in, what we don't want in, what we value, stuff like that. Because I mean, one of the most popular ETFs out there is SCHD, and a lot of people applaud the metrics that they use. I use a lot of the same metrics, and I did that well before I even knew what SCHD was. And like a lot of people are just like, oh, your metrics are too simple. But then they look at SCHD and they're like, oh, these metrics are super, super easy to understand and all kinds of stuff. I'm like, well, I mean, they're kind of the same thing. So I actually did that with, I have a video on the channel talking about like my criteria and how simple it is and like the importance of keeping it simple and something you can follow and understand. And I was curious because like, the internet's always got something to say. So I posted my criteria on the Facebook group. It's got like, I think now it's got like 69,000 members or something in it. And I was like, hey, for all you internet people, I was like, here's my criteria. I don't understand a ton when it comes to investing, but I don't want that to be a hindrance in why I can't invest. So I was like, here's my criteria. Here's why I value this criteria. Can you find any stocks that meet this criteria that you don't like? And weirdly enough, nobody found any stocks that they thought were just disgusting. And like some people were like, oh, this stock's not that good and it doesn't really meet this, but it's close to your dividend growth rates that you look for. I'm like, okay, well, here's the beauty about Excel is I add a filter to my Excel sheet and it doesn't say, oh, give me something close to 10%. If I'm looking for 10%, I filter out everything under 10%. So it's I'm not going to see that stock you're recommending because it's not on my filters. So it was one of those things. And like, that's a case in point. And we actually get into this with one of our future questions is like why, one, following a plan and a method is important, but like making it as simple or as complicated as you can understand and you want to understand is just very valuable. So, but we'll get onto that in a little bit. So, very interesting question. Probably one of my favorite questions to ask. Is your goal at the very end to be able to like fully support your lifestyle off of, pretend YouTube doesn't exist 20 years from now? Is your goal to be able to support yourself and the family that you may or may not have off of your dividend portfolio, or is you just want to keep growing it, or what's the goal with that?
Yeah, I mean, at some point, I'd like to pull my dividends. Exactly when and exactly, where the portfolio is at when I decided to do so. I don't know. We'll see what happens.
That's the question: is when and how do you know when enough is enough?
It's tough. It's tough, but I know when I do think about it, ideally, I would like to not use 100% of my dividends and pull 100%.
Yep.
I'll get to a point where, I'd probably start pulling a little bit. Like, let's say hypothetically, and this, I'm just talking out loud here. Hypothetically, let's say, I reach a point, I'm generating $2,000 of dividend income every single month. I mean, at that point, I don't know. I might feel okay being like, let me take half of that. Let me just take 1,000 out every month. I'll keep the other 1,000 reinvested. That's still, you could still do some damage doing that, and you could still create some serious compounding doing that. And so I might reach a point where I decide to do that, but I really don't know. I have a really hard time answering this question because I truthfully don't know. And I'm curious to know, like, if there's anyone out there watching this right now who is retired and living off their dividend income. I'd love to know, like, what that process looked like for you and how you thought about it. Because I truthfully, I don't know. And I think the answer probably will come with time.
Mhm.
And it may be one of those things where you just like, maybe you just, when it
Yeah.
may be like an instinctual thing. But it's also hard for me to predict because I don't know what my expenses are going to look like, in the future. I just don't. There's just so much I don't know that it's a really hard thing to answer. But I hope YouTube's still around 20 something years from now, or I hope that I can still be able to do something like this,
Mhm.
because I love doing it. And we talked about, or you talked about earlier, when you finally are able to retire or whatever, you don't just sit around. You have more, you do so to be able to put more time into something that gives you purpose, that gives you a sense of fulfillment. And for me, this is that. And we were talking before we started recording, like I do this stuff full time. So interestingly enough, like making videos talking about dividend stocks is how I keep a roof over my head at this point. And I'm so fortunate to be able to do that. But with that said, I don't know. I guess in a way, I already feel kind of like semi-retired. I mean, this is a lot of work. Don't get me wrong, but like
Mhm.
if I'd worked a 9 to 5 and someday down the road and just did this on the side someday down the road, retired from the 9 to 5, man, I would just do exactly what I'm doing now.
Mhm.
And so, when I think down the road to a point when I finally decide to start pulling dividends, I think having something like this puts me in a unique position where I'm going to be doing this anyway. Um, And so I think it puts me in a unique position where I hopefully won't have to be solely reliant on my dividends. And it can be just kind of a sort of like a bonus source of income. In the same way that I think a lot of people think of Social Security
Mhm.
as like a bonus thing. I know a lot of people who, someday assume that they're going to get it. We'll see what happens 30 years down the road. But people who just don't even consider that as part of their future retirement income. It's just extra. It's just supplementary, and they're not exactly relying on it. And I guess in a way, that's kind of how I think about dividend investing. Or my dividends rather. I'm not super stressed about it. Like I know it's all going to work out down the road, and I think hopefully we'll be in a position where I can, I'm still making money doing this, but can also start to pull some dividends, but won't have to rely solely on that income. Does that all make sense? I know it's a very long way to answer
No, no,
that.
no. It does. So to answer your question, because I of course asked this to everybody that I interview. Chad was my very first interview. He had a cool way to think about it, where he said that he wants to get to 110% of his expenses, but his idea, because like I've heard that idea before, but how he explained it was that his expenses include any debt payments that he has, which will eventually be paid off, which I think he's actually changed his mindset and he's actually working on getting those debts paid off sooner, which is cool. So that included any debts at the time, it'll include any debts, it'll include any mortgage, it'll include any investments, and it'll include any emergency savings. So if you can get to 110% of, like, pretend, like in my case, I only have the mortgage. I don't have any debt other than the mortgage. So
Mhm.
if let's just say I'm spending $1,500 a month, let's just say 1,000 for easy math. Say I'm spending $1,000 a month. If I can get to the point where, including everything I spend and what I'm saving and what I'm investing every month, I get to $1,100 a month, that will more than cover what I need, and it'll allow me to live the same exact lifestyle I'm currently living while not doing what I'm currently doing. So like he'll be able to
That
still
makes
add
sense.
his same amount of investments. He'll still be able to save the same amount of money he was saving, and he'll still be able to pay all the bills that he currently has. And
Yeah.
he still has a little bit extra than what he needs.
Okay.
So I was like, that's kind of a cool way to think about it, because like obviously that's going to change as you get a bigger house, or you get a car, or you get whatever kind of debt you might have, or whatever. Like all that stuff changes. But like once you hit the point where it's 110% of everything you're spending, including what you're saving and investing, you can continue to do everything so that way you're pulling your dividends technically, but you're still able to add $1,000 a month or whatever you're adding per month to your investment account, and 500 to savings, or whatever you're doing. You can still do those things and pull money from your dividends, which
hmm
I thought was a cool way to think about it. Cause like I struggle with the same thing. Cause I'm also, you can call it greedy, but like I also know about like the dividend snowball. So to me, I pulled 50 out of a hat. I was like, I want to retire at 50. But to me, like the hard part's going to be like, say I'm making $100,000 when I'm 50 years old in dividends. But if I wait one more year, I can make 80,000. I'm like, well, it's kind of worth it to wait till 51 if I'm going to make an extra $8,000. Like that's worth it.
And that goes back to your question, like, how do you know when enough is enough?
Yeah, that's going to be the hard part for me. Like I do like the 110%, like he was talking about, but to me, like, because it might be $8,000 from year 20 to 21, but it could be $12,000 from 21 to 22. And like when are you good? Like that's I don't know. That's the hard part.
Yeah, well, I think, if you're in a position where you don't have to pull 100% of those dividends, it's like that number will still go up as time goes on, especially if you're invested in stocks with a tendency to increase their dividends, you know what I mean? And so it's like your income will still continue to grow, which is the beauty of it. So the snowball still doesn't stop, albeit it might happen at a slower rate, but that shouldn't keep you from, like, if you think too much about, well, next year it's going to be this much, and then if I just wait and the next year it's going to be that much, it's like, well, dude, then you'll never take them because
Yeah.
that's just always going to be the case. And so, yeah, I get what you're saying. Some people might call that greedy, but it's also goes back to what Charlie Munger said. It's like, if you're the worst thing you can do with compounding is interrupt it. So, um, so you kind of think of it that way too. But I think you'll know. I just think inherently you'll come to know when the time is right. And the beauty is it's such a liquid thing. You've got the flexibility to pull dividends or not pull dividends if you want to. So it'll be fine.
Yeah, I'm not worried about it. It's just, and at the end of the day, like asking me or you, like I've been doing it for coming up on 4 years. You've been doing it for 4 years, coming up on 5. Like, and we're both still like you're 30, I'm 29. Like,
Yeah.
it's hard to tell what we're gonna do 30 years from now because we haven't done anything for 30 years. Like you've been
Right.
breathing for 30 years, but I don't know what I'm doing in 30 years. Like that's hard to.
Yeah, dude. And that's why I just try and chalk it up to, like, just want to keep getting better and just focus on what I do know, and just be a constant student of the game. And I think the rest will work itself out.
Yeah, I agree with that. Okay, so next question for you. Do you have any specific criteria that you use when selecting your dividend stocks?
Great question, man. I will say in terms of the dividend stats, not necessarily. Like I don't look for a minimum yield, or I don't necessarily look for like a minimum dividend growth rate because or a minimum dividend growth history or something like that, because in my portfolio I try and keep a pretty solid balance. I've got some stocks that are higher yielding. I've got some stocks that are lower yielding but have higher dividend growth, and I like having that balance. And so in terms of the dividend stats, I don't really discriminate. I think I'm at a point now where I probably have gotten enough high yielders. My yield is okay. I could probably stand to increase my overall dividend growth rate in the portfolio. So I might, when I'm doing research, look for things for now that have higher dividend growth rates. But otherwise, if I'm looking at a new business, or on the hunt for a new dividend stock or something like that, for me, and this is one of those lessons that I've also had to learn the hard way. For me, it starts with do I even understand what this company does? Like, can I wrap my head around this business and get a sense of how they make money and how they operate? If I can do that, then that's a huge box that's checked. If I can't do that, and it seems that I'll have to spend a ton of time just trying to figure out what they do, um, it's probably not something that will be a good long-term hold for me. And this is why I tend to gravitate, especially lately, towards companies in my portfolio like Starbucks or Procter and Gamble or Snap-on or Williams Sonoma, because I get it. Like those are easy for me to understand. So moving forward, for me, it starts with that. Next, I'll take some time and try and get a sense for the financials. And in general, I don't want to get too deep in the weeds with this, but in general, I'm just looking for a company that's growing. Are they increasing their sales? Are they increasing their earnings? Are they profitable? Is the free cash flow stable and or growing? Is the dividend well covered based on these financials? The debt situation, is the debt serviceable? Is it not too out of hand? Um, those are kind of some of the things that I look for financially and fundamentally. Um, and I'd say that's kind of the two big components. Do I understand it? Is the business growing, and are they, financially sound? And then after that, I'll maybe think more about the dividend and how it fits into my portfolio, or I'll try and think, a little bit more qualitatively about the business and about what some of their competitive advantages are, if there are any, what they might look like 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road. How do they stand against some of their competitors? I'll try and spend some time thinking about stuff like that. And that's the hard part, I think, is thinking about some of those more abstract aspects of a business. And I think that's where a lot of the room for error can come. But I also think that's one of the more exciting parts. But anyway, as time goes on and I get more experience as an investor, I'm trying to spend more time on that aspect of it because, yeah, I just think that from a long term perspective, if you're trying to think 20 years down the road, which is, no one can predict the future, but I think that part of it's a pretty important thing to spend time on. Um, and so, in a nutshell, those are the things I look for when evaluating a potential investment. And I've gotten away from, because of that, because that's kind of the direction I'm going down, and and that's kind of where this journey is taking me as it pertains to research. I'm really getting away from even considering certain things like covered call ETFs. I have JEPI in my portfolio, but I'm about to get out of that. I'm up on it on a total return basis, thankfully, so I've made a little bit of money. But in hindsight, that's just another one of those things where I look at and I'm just like, this isn't anything real. This this I just don't know that I want to, like, I don't know what can you attach yourself to as it pertains to some sort of conviction in this holding. I just, in hindsight, there's nothing. And so I look at something like that and I think, yeah, I'm getting a nice dividend from it, but that's not enough at this point that I'm at and where I want to go with this. That's not enough to hold on to. That's not enough of a reason to hold on to something like this. So I'm trying to lean more into the other things that I'm talking about and looking strictly at businesses. Hopefully all that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I let. So you did bring up a couple of things that I just thought of while you were talking about that. So it seems like you almost treat your portfolio like an ETF, like we were saying before, where you kind of have like a goal dividend growth rate and a goal yield that you're trying to accomplish, but within the grand scheme of your whole portfolio, not on an individual stock basis. Is that kind of close to what you're talking about? Like you look at your portfolio as a whole, but like, my dividend growth rate for my portfolio is around 6%. I'd like it to be 7%. Let's try to focus on that.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly, man. My yield right now, it's always hovered at about 4.5%. And I think that's great. Like, I'm very happy with that. And across my entire portfolio, just taking a weighted average of the dividend growth, I'm at about 6.7, 6.8%, I believe, somewhere in the 6% range. And that's not bad either. But I look at that and I think, I think it would be totally feasible for me to still maintain a 4% yield and get my dividend growth rate up to a point where it's like 8%. The 5-year CAGR, weighted average is 8% or possibly even higher. I think that just, I look at all my holdings and I think that I could probably pull that off. And if I can, I think that's really, really well balanced
Mm.
in terms of the dividend stats. And if all of those companies are ones that where I feel the dividend is secure and, you know, doesn't appear to be at any risk of being cut, then that's huge. I'll take that. You know what I mean?
So the follow up to that's going to be with the portfolio moves you're going to be making from what we've had talked about with Visa or not Visa, Verizon, AT&T, and JEPI. Have you like kind of figured out like what you're gonna like what kind of stocks you're looking to replace those with, and like what's that gonna do to your, we're gonna just call it your ETF, and what's that gonna do to like the goals that you're setting for your yield and your dividend growth rates and the like?
Sure, man. So that's a really, really good question. So, in eventually getting rid of all three of those positions, and Intel's another one that I plan on selling, not a high yielder, but those other three are high yielders. They're some of the higher yielding ones in my portfolio. So certainly a thought of mine is, how do I finagle things so I don't, in making these moves, don't lose out too much on current income? How do I not take steps backward? Um, and like I said, I've got other high yielders in my portfolio, and the ones that would still be left over after selling out of AT&T and T and Verizon and JEPI are ones that I feel more confident in, and ones that I'm pretty sure I will I will receive a greater total return across a long period of time with those. And I'm just, for some examples, like EPD, Enterprise Products Partners, I feel really good about that company, and it's a higher yielder. Um, Realty Income's pushing 6%. That's not too shabby. WP Carey is another one that I have that's closer to 7%. Excuse me. And then I've got a couple more like Main Street Capital Corporation, Blue Owl Capital Corporation are ones that I feel better about, and ones that have been really good investments for me so far. And I see more growth with those companies. So I think there's a way, in a nutshell, wrapping this up, I think there's a way to sell out of those positions and reinvest into other things that where I'll either end up with more income if I really wanted to, or about the same, or potentially just a little bit less. And that's not to say I'm just going to sell out of these high yielders, put it all into these other high yielders. I'll probably put some of that money into those, but I probably will spread it out across some of the other positions that I can maybe average down on, like Johnson and Johnson. Um, and it's so, but in a nutshell, if for some reason I lose out on a little bit of income in the short term, it's okay. I'm only 30 years old. I'm going to be doing this the rest of my life. I've got plenty of time to make up for that quote unquote lost income today. It'll be totally fine.
Yeah.
And ultimately, like, the important thing is I'll be selling out of fund stocks and ETFs that I don't have as much conviction in, and I think the result of that will be a more streamlined portfolio with holdings that I have a higher degree of confidence in, and I'll have less holdings, so I'll be less diversified. But I think ultimately it'll be a better portfolio.
Yeah. Well, I think it's really important that you said what you just said about like realizing that your yield and therefore how much, how much,
Sure.
annual dividend, your projected annual dividend income you're expected to make will come down, but you're not at the point where you're needing that money anyway. So at the sacrifice for long-term health of your portfolio or your ETF in that case, it's worth it to maybe you go from, you said you're around 2,400, right, in your annual dividend income right now. So maybe you
Yeah,
go from,
and I'm even getting closer to 2,500. It's that snowball starting to really pick up. So
yeah. So like maybe when you do these moves, like maybe you drop from 2,500 down to 2,100. But at the end of the day, if your portfolio is better positioned for long-term growth and success, you'll get back to 2,500 and then some, like in the future by repositioning it. So I know a lot of people. So if you did, I don't know if you own this one or not, but I've done a couple Power Fives on it. ABR, Arbor Realty Trust.
Arbor.
Yeah, very, very good. From what I've been able to tell, their dividend yield is like 13%, and it's one of the only ones that it's like that high and still outperforms the S&P 500.
Yeah, I agree. I tend to stay away from mortgage REITs like ABR, but if there's one that I do think is worth considering, it's that one. The rest of them, to me, just for the most part, look like yield traps.
Yeah.
But ABR, it has a really solid history of paying and actually growing their dividend.
Yeah.
So, yeah, and that's a good point that you bring up. Like, not all high yielders are bad.
Yeah.
Not all stocks with high dividend growth CAGRs are good. There's so much gray area. There's so much nuance to this investing thing. And
Well, like one thing, so with the Power Five, like a lot of feedback I get is that the stocks I recommend with high yields aren't high enough. And I tell people, I'm like, I don't cherry pick these stocks. I literally let the spreadsheet tell me who I'm talking about every week. And when I filter for yield, and then the next thing I filter for, does it outperform the S&P 500? Historically, higher yields don't outperform. Like that's just how it works. You're taking the capital now versus long-term capital appreciation. Like that's kind of the trade-off. And it doesn't always have to be that way, but historically that's how it is. And then what you were saying about the dividend growth rate, because that's one thing that I very value a lot. One thing I've noticed is that you'll see some of these stocks with ungodly high dividend growth rates, but they're paying like 6 cents per share per year. And then they raise it to 12 cents per share per year, and their dividend growth rate looks amazing. And I'm like, well, yes, but they also, doubled something that's not much to double versus like something like Broadcom or something, or even like a Lowe's or a Home Depot or Tractor Supply Company, like these stocks with giant dividend growth rates, but they also pay out a very big dividend as well. So like I would much rather see a 10, 12% dividend growth rate from somebody that's paying out, $3 per share per year versus a 30% dividend growth rate that's paying out 3 cents per share per year. Like it's a big difference. So it's one of those things to evaluate. And like you said, step back and actually consider the full picture of these things. And everything's not a 10% for this one and a 10% that for that one they're not always equal.
yeah, and when thinking about selling out of some of these positions, how it's going to affect my dividend income is certainly something that I consider, but at the same time, it's not the end all be all. You can't make decisions solely based on what it's going to do to your dividend income. Uh, that's a if that's your primary focus all the time, it's going to result, I think, in some poor
Mhm.
decisions.
Well, that's how people get into a lot of the yield traps and stuff is that sometimes they're
Exactly.
focusing on the right thing with they're focusing on their passive income and taking control of their financial future, but everybody always wants to find the shortest path to do so. That's where these
Yeah.
TSLYs and your ZIMs and your whatever else, that's where those come into play. But then, like I've said this hundreds of times, that's where you get $75 in your left hand and lose $100 in your right hand, and you're not really getting any progress.
Yeah, it's kind of like driving a car, man. If you go on a road trip, obviously you're going to get to your destination a lot faster if you're going 95 miles per hour the entire time. But if you take that route, if you take that approach, it's like your risk for getting in an accident and being seriously injured goes up quite a bit than if you were to drive in a more sustainable, albeit slower speed. It's a bit safer. Your risk of getting in an accident or at least a devastating one isn't as high. And even though it's going to get you there slower, it's going to be probably the better way to go.
Yeah. And weirdly enough, talking about road trips, it's actually more fuel efficient to drive 65 than it is 95. So there you
Well, there you go.
go. Okay, so we're getting close to out of questions here. So we talked about basically your ETF this whole time. So how important is staying diversified within your ETF of your portfolio, and then what rules and methods do you use to help you with that?
Um, I don't know that I follow any strict rules with that. I can say that when I was earlier on in my investing journey, I had more holdings than I do today. I have 22 different holdings right now, and I'll consolidate that a little bit more. But I don't know that I have any hard set rules as it pertains to diversification. I will say though that I don't. If you have a smaller portfolio, I don't know. And there's no, I want to preface this by saying there's really no right or wrong way. In a lot of ways, it's preferential. But speaking personally, I don't feel the need to have 50 different stocks
Mm-hmm.
or 60 different stocks. I feel pretty good with the number that I have. And I could have a little bit more than I do and still feel fine. Um, and so I think in a lot of ways, you just kind of have to feel it out. And just through trial and error, you'll learn where your sweet spot is in terms of diversification and how many holdings fits for you. And with that said, I do think it's natural as time goes on and your portfolio grows and you're working with a larger pool of money. I do think it makes more sense to be a bit more spread out with your holdings.
Mm-hmm.
I do think it makes more sense to let that number expand. And it's probably a good way to go. I think if you have more to lose, you should try and be a bit more protective and a bit more defensive with what you have, especially if you're at a point or close to a point where you will be using it to fund your lifestyle. The last thing you want to do is to have all your eggs in too few of baskets and to have something happen to that and lose out on that income or lose out on that money. So with that said, I do think it's natural to, excuse me, see your number of holdings expand over time. But I'm not in any rush to do so. If and when I sell out of all four of these positions I've talked about, I'll be left with 18 stocks. And I think at my portfolio size, that's not too shabby,
Mm-hmm.
especially considering I'm also in my Roth IRA, I have SCHD and I have VU. And as time goes on, those will become larger percentages of the overall portfolio. So I still feel pretty spread out.
So do you when you're looking for the stocks that you're going to buy, do you like say it's you're looking for one, you get you filter your list down to 3 stocks that you understand and that have good fundamentals and stuff like that. Do you look and be like, "Oh, this one's in the industrial sector. I have, 4 or 5 stocks in industrials. Let me look for this other one."
Yeah, I guess I actually do that. I'm actually going through that right now with the real estate investment trusts. Like Vici Properties is especially live in Las Vegas. I have a certain bias towards Las Vegas, obviously. And so Vici Properties is a stock that I like the idea of investing in. But I look at my portfolio and I have 3 other real estate investment trusts right now that I also think are pretty solid picks. And so it's kind of weighing that decision. Should I, knowing that I have these other 3 over here that I really like and have and certainly more than happy to continue putting money into, is that going to be better than adding this other one over here, this Avicii Properties, and so having 4 different REITs. And so when I think about it, as much as I would be okay having an extra, that company in particular, it just simultaneously feels a bit overkill to have 4 REITs. I just don't know that I need that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's one of the things that I had an interview with Kenyon a long time. It's my longest interview, I think. It's like 2 hours and 46 minutes.
Wow.
But he threw a wrench into like the whole idea of diversification for me. So I always encourage people to go listen to that just for like the different point of view where I don't think he has a lot of stocks. He has a very large percentage of his money in Broadcom, and it's done very well for him, but he understands that industry. He understands that stock, and he's accepting of the risk. So he's just like, why would I want to invest in a stock or a sector that I don't like just to say I'm diversified when I don't understand it, when I can invest in something I do understand that actually it's I forget, I think it's Peter Lynch that says like, don't, cut your flowers and water your weeds kind of thing. So it's one of those things where it's just like, okay, like he understands it. He's making money on it. Why doesn't he keep putting money in it? So it's just a different perspective that he offered, which I thought was cool.
Yeah, and I understand that sentiment, but I hear that and I think, well, what if you're wrong?
Yeah.
Like you might understand Broadcom, but you might be wrong.
Yeah.
You never know what's going to happen. So I think a certain amount of diversification is an important thing to hedge against the potential that you're wrong.
Yeah, it is.
How much you need to do that? I don't know. I think it's going to differ from person to person. But I certainly don't have the confidence to just put all my eggs in 3 or 4 different baskets. I need more diversification to that because
Unless
there's
it's like
still
VOO or something, right?
right, exactly. Which in effect is like having 500 different stocks. So
Yeah.
you could get by just having that one fund. But with individual companies, it's like I could be wrong.
Yeah. Yeah. It's, I mean, and I when I was asking him, I was like, hey, like, that's kind of risky. And he's like, yeah, I'm aware of the risk and I'm okay with it. I was like, hey, it's doing well for him. So I was like, hey, while it's working, you're a genius. And then if it doesn't work or if it does continue to work or whatever, but I just had a pop-up show up on my computer. Okay. Okay. So second to last question for you.
Sure.
And you're in the dividend space and you're, a big presence on Twitter and obviously YouTube. So you might get more of this. So this might be a very, really good question for you. Are there any dividend related myths or misconceptions that you hear all the time that are just not true that you want to debunk?
Oh man.
My biggest one that I always hear is like dividend investing's an old person's game. And I'm like, it's actually better if you start sooner.
That's a great one. I wish I would have thought of that. And I made a video talking about that too. I made a video talking about certain myths about dividend investing. One that does come to mind is, how do I say this? One that comes to mind is the idea that dividend aristocrats and dividend kings are like the best stocks to invest in. And the thought process behind it does make sense. It's like you look at a company with an extensive dividend growth history, the only way a company can get there is with financial prudence and stability and so that is a good thing to see, but at the same time, dividend kings and dividend aristocrats are not invincible. A lot of them are, I guess you could consider sleep well at night stocks, but it's still important to keep in mind that really anything can happen. And even the most secure dividend king can fall on hard times and lose its dividend king status. And in a lot of cases, certain dividend kings, they're at a point where they're only giving these like token dividend increases, like a penny every single year just to maintain that dividend growth streak. And so it's not like you may not get the best returns with those stocks, which is okay because a lot of times they are stable and maybe that's more so why you buy them. But I guess the point I'm trying to make is don't just buy into a stock because it's got a certain dividend growth history. We've seen it with like VF Corporation, for example, that dividend growth streak is gone. AT&T was a dividend aristocrat, I believe. I could be wrong on that, but I think they were a dividend aristocrat before they cut their dividend.
Yep.
3M.
Yep.
Let's see what's going to happen with 3M, but they've certainly fallen on hard times. Leggett and Platt, a dividend king, their payout ratio has been over 100% for these last 2 years, I believe. So we'll see what happens. But I do think that is one thing that a lot of newer investors maybe don't quite understand about investing in these type of dividend stocks. And I do think it's pretty easy to look at that sort of metric and make certain assumptions about it. But there's more to the story, there. But let me see if I can. I don't know. I might need another minute to think of some other myths. But do you have any others that come to mind for you? Like, this is a really good question, and there's quite a handful of them out there too. By the way.
Yeah, I mean the biggest ones are like like I said, definitely the age thing. Like everybody's like, oh yeah, you should only invest in dividends when you're 65. I'm like, I mean, you can, but like I don't like the idea. And another one, I mean, this is kind of along the same lines, is like people seem to think that it's dividends or growth, and it can't be both. That
That's
look
a
at
good one
that.
too.
That's a good rhyme right there too. But it's one of those things, like I do dividend growth investing where the companies I buy grow and they're paying me dividends to wait. So it's one of those things where like some people will do, you know, yield only, or they'll do growth only, where they're like, you know, Amazon and Meta and stuff like that. And I'm like, well, that's great, but like when you get to the point where you need your money, you have to sell your stock. And like that's the perk of dividend investing, is like if I want to own Apple or Microsoft or Visa or Starbucks or whoever I'm owning, if I get to the point where that is paying me enough, I can just keep my shares and get paid. And if I get to the point where it's not paying me enough, then I can sell it and put it into something higher paying if I wish. So it's the best of both worlds in my so that's one that bothers me a lot. And then the one you hear all the time of like and it's annoying because it's just wrong, is like the dividends are like they're not tax efficient, which
Mhm.
I get that they're quote unquote like triple taxed or whatever because the company's getting taxed, then you're getting taxed or whatever. But like you're the tax brackets on dividends are far more friendly than regular income tax, like far more friendly.
Yeah, that's one that I was gonna. That's one that I wanted to bring up too, is the whole tax thing. I think for a lot of people who are kind of naysayers against this style of investing, which there's a lot of them out there, dividend investing, it tends to get a lot of hate.
Because it's so easy.
Yeah, yeah, I guess.
Because it works.
The tax thing is a big thing that people always say, that you're taxed on your dividends. It's a forced taxable event, that sort of thing. But at the same time, it's like if you're selling your stocks 20 years down the road, you're still going to pay tax on that. So I think it's like you either pay the tax now or you pay the tax in the future on that. But
Well, I mean,
yeah,
long term,
that's
either way, dividend tax and long term capital appreciation tax, which is under the same tax bracket, is still significantly less than federal income tax. So
right.
like you can make, as a married couple, I think we can make like 100 and something thousand dollars before we end up paying 15% tax. I think it's like 89,290 or something like that for 0%. And I'm just
Yeah.
like, that's almost 90 grand a year for 0% tax.
Yeah, that's a lot, man. And the thing about that, it's like, if it's such a big deal to you, if that's such a huge concern, just invest in a Roth IRA and you're
Yeah.
good to go.
When it comes, so I just was on a Facebook post the other day about, I think it also stems from like people just genuinely not understanding how tax brackets work. Because people seem to think that like if you're in I think the 12% tax bracket for federal income tax, and then you make enough money to go to the 22% tax bracket because there's nothing in between for whatever reason, they seem to think that all of your income is now subject to the new tax bracket, when only the amount over the tax bracket threshold is subject to the taxable amount.
Hmm.
So like people don't understand that. So say it's $10,000 for 12%, and then it's $20,000 for 22%. If you make $20,001, literally only that $1 is taxed at 22%. The other
Okay.
20,000 is taxed at 10 or 12%. Like that's how the tax brackets work. So people flipping out and losing their minds over like going into the next tax bracket, literally the amount over that bracket is what is taxed at that new rate, not the whole amount. So like that's just another thing that like it's and obviously there's way more about taxes that I don't know, and way more ways to skirt the system. And it seems like the most wealthy people are the best at skirting taxes. That's how it works. But like I always want to keep learning about taxes to like keep more of my money because that's cool to me. But yeah, it's one of those things where like the whole crap about dividends. I feel like 95% of those people that talk crap about dividends, about the tax structure of dividends, don't understand the tax code in general. So I don't know. Stuff bothers me.
Yeah, man, you can't make everyone happy. Everyone's got to do what they think is best. And my whole thing about that, because dividend investing is on the receiving end of a lot of disparaging comments. Um, it's like, dude, there's pros and cons to everything.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know that it's lost on any of us that there's no cons to dividend investing. Everything's got its ups and its downs, but for us to do it, like, the pros outweigh the cons by so much. And there's more than one way to build wealth. There's more than one way to make money, and this is the way that resonates with a lot of us. And if you're a real estate investor or a growth investor, or even if you're all in on the yield max funds, there's more than one way to do things. There's more than one way to skin the cat. So
Yeah.
I don't know why people have to be so disparaging.
Yeah.
It doesn't make
And
it's
why
just
it's
a waste
always
of
got to be
time.
a cat.
Well,
poor cats.
I don't know.
I'm not a
that's
cat
good
guy, to
point.
be honest, but like I like kittens because kittens actually do stuff. But every cat I see, I go over to somebody's house. They're like, "Yeah, we have a cat." I'm like, "I've never seen the cat at your house," and it's not like locked up. They're just like, "Yeah, the litter box is full and the food bowl goes down. I guess we have a cat still." You never see it. It's on a bookshelf somewhere in the corner, like you don't know. I'm more of a dog guy, but yeah, it's always poor cats are always getting skinned. That's terrible.
Someone's got to get skinned,
Yeah.
so I guess that's
I guess the cat's the best option there. But okay, so last question for you. Somebody watching today's video has decided that you're really convincing, I'm really convincing. They want to invest and they want to do dividend investing. What is your tip or tips for them? So it can't be just to get started and it can't be to just do dividend investing, but like other than those things, what are your tips for them?
So, I mean, if you're just starting out and you've decided that this is the route you want to go, but you don't quite know where to begin, I think really if you're fresh to all of this, the best way to get some skin in the game, start building some passive income and start learning the ropes is just to, as boring as it sounds, just start investing in ETFs. I think you could really build a rock solid portfolio just investing into VU and SCHD or something like that. Some sort of, broad S&P 500 index, as well as some sort of more dividend-based fund. I think that's going to be a great place to start. And I think if you want to expand beyond that and start investing in individual stocks and try your hand at that, with that, I think the best place to start, is one thing that you'll absolutely have to learn how to do is you'll have to learn how to read financial statements. You'll have to learn about the income statement, the balance sheet, and the statement of cash flows. And it's especially if you've never done it before, it's kind of like learning a whole new language. Like I say that with firsthand experience because I had no idea how to do any of that stuff and I'm still learning it. But one thing that's really, really helped me learn how to read financial statements and get familiar with them is this book right here. This book is called Warren Buffett and the Interpretation of Financial Statements. And it was written by his former daughter-in-law and some other guy named David Clark. But basically what it does is it will take you line item by line item by line item in all three of the major financial statements: income statement, balance sheet, statement of cash flows. It'll explain what each thing is, how to look at it, how to analyze it, and how it all relates to each other. And so if you're looking for the best place to start learning financial statements, I think this is it. It's very easy to understand, and it's an essential skill set you'll need to develop if you want to start looking at individual companies. So that would be my advice.
Well, and I like that you mentioned them in the order that you did, because it's more important that somebody gets started and then learns as they go before they do their own individual thing. So in your strategy, it was get into ETFs and make sure you're making your money work for you. And while it is working for you, now you can start building on your knowledge before you venture off into your own things.
Yeah, and by the way, that's not how I started. I did not go the ETF route, but if I had to start from scratch all over, that's probably the route that I would take.
Yeah, I like that. I like that strategy. But anyway, Ryan, it's been a blast speaking with you today. I hope you enjoyed it. These times always go way faster than I think they do. I'm always like,
Yeah,
man,
man,
that's been
no.
like 20 minutes, but we've been like an hour and a half. So,
Well, thank you so much for having me on, dude. It really was a blast. I had a lot of fun.
Yeah, I appreciate you for taking time out of your weekend to speak with me. And feel free to go ahead and plug your newsletter and your YouTube channel and where they can find you on Twitter and all the things.
Yeah, thank you. So, I mean, if you guys want to check out some of my videos, it's just my name, Ryne Williams. You go on YouTube and you search that and I'll pop up. Through that, you can find my newsletter. I put it out once a week. If you want to check that out, you can sign up and also read old articles at retirewithryne.com. That's RYNE. Check that out, browse around some of the articles, and yeah, you can get that email newsletter delivered straight to your inbox every Thursday morning. But that's pretty much it. I hope you guys enjoyed this conversation and got something out of it. If you're still listening, I thank you so much for hanging out with us and listening to our gibberish on dividend investing. I know we had a lot of fun doing it, so I hope you did as well and had some good takeaways from it. But and Troy, dude, thank you once again so much for having me on it. Truly an honor.
And that concludes another insightful episode of Dividend Discussion. I hope you found inspiration and valuable takeaways from our engaging conversation. If you're hungry for more dividend investing wisdom, be sure to subscribe to Dividend Obsession and hit that notification bell to stay up to date with my latest interviews, tips, and strategies. Remember, the journey to financial independence is a marathon, not a sprint. Keep applying the lessons you've learned and stay committed to growing your wealth using dividends. Together, we can create a community of dividend investors sharing knowledge and supporting one another. If you enjoyed this episode, don't hesitate to share it with other investors that are equally passionate about the power of dividends. Let's spread our dividend obsession far and wide. But until next time, see you.